"Do you even hear me, old man?" I said. "Who are you supposed to be?" The voice was sharp, a razor's edge of youthful impatience cutting through the solemn quiet of the cemetery. It belonged to a young Marine, Lance Corporal Davies, whose dress blues were so crisp they seemed to crackle in the cool autumn air. He stood with his arms crossed, a human barrier between an old man and a flag-draped casket. His partner, Private First Class Gallo, shifted his weight, his own discomfort a pale reflection of Davies's open hostility. Dale Cooper, 84 years old, didn't answer. He wasn't being defiant. The world had simply grown a little quieter for him over the years, the volume turned down by time and tinnitus from a lifetime ago. His focus was on the polished mahogany of the coffin resting under the gray sky. Inside was Michael Miller, a man he hadn't seen in 50 years but whose face was as clear in his mind as his own reflection. Dale's gaze was steady, his back straight despite the slight stoop of his age. He wore a faded leather jacket over a simple flannel shirt, clothes that had seen more life than the two young Marines combined. His hands, gnarled and spotted, rested on the handle of a simple wooden cane, but they did not tremble. They were perfectly still. "He's probably deaf," Gallo whispered, his voice a nervous hiss. "Maybe we should just, guide him away." "Guide him away," Davies scoffed, his voice dripping with condescension. "Look at him. He's probably wandered off from a home. This is a private service for a decorated sergeant major. He doesn't belong here." Davies took a step closer, invading Dale's personal space. He lowered his voice to a tone of exaggerated, mocking patience, the kind one uses for a child or a simpleton. "Sir, this is a funeral, a very important funeral. Do you have an invitation? Are you on the guest list? Are you family?" Dale's eyes, the color of washed-out denim, finally shifted from the casket to the young Marine. He blinked slowly, as if returning from a great distance. "I'm a friend," he said. His voice was raspy, a dry rustle of leaves. "A friend," Davies repeated, sharing an eye roll with Gallo. "Right. Everyone's a friend today. Look, Grandpa, we have our orders. The family requested strict privacy. Only listed personnel and next of kin are permitted beyond this point. So unless your name is on my list, you're going to have to move along and pay your respects from the public viewing area." He gestured vaguely with his thumb toward a distant rope line, 100 yards away. A small crowd of mourners, trickling in from the parking area, began to slow as they passed, their curiosity piqued by the quiet confrontation. A woman in a black dress clutched her husband's arm, her expression turning from sympathy to concern. A retired colonel, his posture still rigid, narrowed his eyes, sensing a discord in the ceremony's solemn rhythm. The air was thick with the scent of cut grass and impending rain. And now, a new unpleasant tension. Dale didn't look at the list in the Marine's hand. He knew his name wouldn't be on it. The life he and Michael had shared was not the kind that generated paperwork or formal invitations. It was a life measured in whispered promises made in the dark, in shared rations, in the silent understanding that passed between two men in a place where death was more common than clean water. "He would have wanted me here," Dale said, his voice quiet but firm. He took a hesitant step forward, his worn boot sinking slightly into the manicured lawn. Davies instantly blocked his path, puffing out his chest. The polished buttons on his uniform gleamed. "That's not for you to decide. My orders are from the family and the base commander. Now I'm not going to ask you again. Step back." The injustice of it was a palpable thing. Here on this sacred ground, surrounded by the silent white stones of heroes, a man was being barred from saying goodbye to his brother. The two young guards, so full of rigid pride in their uniform and their duty, were utterly blind. They saw a frail, confused old man in shabby clothes, not the bedrock of courage on which their own service was built. They saw a nuisance to be managed, not a piece of living history. "What's the problem here, Lance Corporal?" The voice belonged to the retired colonel who had been watching from a distance. He stepped forward, his presence carrying an authority that Davies couldn't simply dismiss. Davies snapped to a parade rest, his demeanor shifting slightly. "Sir, this man is attempting to disrupt the service. He's not on the guest list and refuses to cooperate." The colonel looked from Davies's stiff posture to Dale's quiet dignity. He studied Dale's face, searching for a sign, a glimmer of recognition. He saw none. He saw only an old man who looked tired and sad. The colonel's shoulders slumped almost imperceptibly. He had hoped for something else. "Well, Lance Corporal, the family did request privacy. Perhaps the gentleman is just confused." He gave Dale a sympathetic yet dismissive look. "Son, maybe it's best if you just—" But Dale wasn't looking at the colonel. He was looking past him, past the guards, his eyes once again fixed on the casket. "I just need to say goodbye." He tried to step around the guard again, a slow, shuffling movement. This time Davies was rougher. He put a hand firmly on Dale's chest, shoving him back a step. The old man stumbled, his cane clattering on the paved walkway. It was a small act of violence, but in the hallowed silence of Arlington, it felt like a gunshot rippled through the onlookers. The woman in the black dress brought her hand to her mouth. The colonel's face hardened, his sympathy evaporating, replaced by a flash of anger at the guard's lack of decorum. "There is no need for that, Marine," the colonel snapped. "With all due respect, sir, I have my orders," Davies said, his own frustration boiling over. He felt the eyes of the crowd on him, and it made him more aggressive, more determined to prove he was in control. He leaned down, his face close to Dale's. "This is your final warning. Leave now, or I will have you removed for trespassing and creating a public disturbance. Do you understand me?" As Davies pushed him, Dale's jacket sleeve rode up his thin wrist, exposing a dark, braided leather bracelet. It was old, the leather cracked and worn smooth with age, a simple handmade thing of no monetary value. Gallo noticed it first. "What is that piece of junk?" he muttered. More to himself than anyone else. The words, though quiet, seemed to echo in Dale's mind. A piece of junk. His vision blurred, the manicured green of Arlington dissolving into the suffocating triple canopy jungle of Vietnam. The air was thick, wet, and alive with the buzz of insects and the distant rhythmic thump of mortar fire. He was 24 years old again, huddled in a foxhole filled with 6 inches of reddish-brown water. Beside him, a young Private Michael Miller was meticulously braiding 3 thin strips of leather cut from a ruined boot. His hands, caked with mud and blood, were surprisingly deft. "What are you making?" Dale had asked, his voice a low growl. "Friendship bracelets," Miller had replied with a weak, feverish grin. "So we don't forget. So if one of us gets out of this hellhole, he'll have something to remember the other by. A promise. To live a life big enough for both of us." He finished the knot and pushed the damp leather band onto Dale's wrist. "Don't you ever take it off, Coop. That's an order." The memory vanished as quickly as it came, leaving an ache in Dale's chest that was sharper than any physical pain. The cemetery snapped back into focus. The sneering face of the young guard, the concerned faces in the crowd, the cold, unforgiving reality of the moment. He looked down at the bracelet on his wrist. It wasn't a piece of junk. It was a testament. It was a promise. Among the mourners stood Sarah Jenkins, Sergeant Miller's grandniece. She was a lawyer, sharp and observant, and she had been watching the entire exchange with a growing sense of outrage. She didn't recognize the old man, but she recognized the look in his eyes. It was the same look she'd seen in her granduncle's eyes in his final days, a profound, deep-seated sorrow, a connection to a past she could only imagine. Her granduncle had been a quiet man, but he had told her stories, fragmented and rare, about the men he served with, especially one man he called Coop, a ghost from the jungle who had saved his life. The guard's physical shove was the final straw. Sarah saw the old man stumble, saw the bracelet on his wrist, and a cold certainty washed over her. She turned away from the scene, her movements quick and deliberate. She pulled her phone from her purse, her fingers flying across the screen, bypassing her recent calls and going deep into her contacts. She found the name she was looking for, a name she hadn't needed in over 5 years. General Peterson, personal. General Marcus Peterson was the current commandant of the Marine Corps, a family friend who had served under her granduncle decades ago. She pressed the call button, her heart pounding. It was an audacious move, interrupting the most powerful Marine on the planet on a Saturday. But she didn't care. He answered on the second ring, his voice a calm, authoritative baritone. "Sarah, is everything all right?" "General, I'm sorry to bother you. I'm at Uncle Mike's funeral at Arlington," she said, her voice low and urgent. She turned her back to the crowd, walking quickly toward a quiet grove of oak trees. "I know. I wish I could be there. I'm stuck in budget meetings at the Pentagon. Is the ceremony proceeding well?" "No, sir, it's not," she said, the words tumbling out. "There's a situation at the entrance. The honor guard is refusing entry to an old man. They're being disrespectful. They just put their hands on him." She took a breath. "General, he says he was a friend, an old man wearing a leather jacket. He's very quiet, but he won't leave. He keeps trying to get to the casket." Pedersen was silent for a moment. He processed the information with military efficiency. "I'm sure the Marines are just following their orders, Sarah. Security has been heightened." "I know, but there's something about him," she insisted, desperation creeping into her voice. "The guards are treating him like a vagrant. When they were arguing, I heard him give his name. He said his name was Dale Cooper." The silence on the other end of the line was absolute. For a full 5 seconds, Sarah thought the call had dropped. Then General Peterson's voice came back, but it was completely changed. The calm authority was gone, replaced by a tone of stunned, horrified disbelief. "Say that name again." "Dale Cooper," she repeated. Another pause, this one crackling with energy. She could hear the sound of a chair scraping violently against a floor. "Sarah." The general's voice was now a low, dangerous growl. "Keep him there. Do not let him leave. Do whatever you have to do. I'm on my way." The line went dead. Sarah stood under the oak trees, her phone still pressed to her ear, a shiver running down her spine. She didn't know the full story, but she knew she had just lit a fuse. The cavalry was coming. Inside his sprawling office at the Pentagon, General Marcus Peterson stood frozen, the phone still in his hand. The name echoed in the vast, silent room. Dale Cooper. It was a name spoken only in whispers in the highest echelons of the military. A name synonymous with a legend so extraordinary it bordered on myth. It was a name that hadn't been uttered in an official capacity in decades. One. He slammed the phone down onto its cradle, the sound cracking like a rifle shot. He strode to his intercom, his face a mask of cold fury. "Major," he barked, "get me air transport to Arlington National Cemetery, Section 60. Now." Scrambled the silent drill platoon. "I want them dressed and on the tarmac in 10 minutes. Tell them to meet me there, and get me the officer in charge of the Arlington garrison on the line. I want to know who is running the security detail for Sergeant Major Michael Miller's funeral, and I want their names." His aide, a young, competent major, could only stammer. "Sir, is there a threat?" "The threat," General Peterson said, his voice dropping to a near whisper as he grabbed his cover from its stand, "is that 2 of my Marines are about to commit the single greatest act of sacrilege in the history of this Corps." He was already moving toward the door, his long strides eating up the carpet. "They have no idea who they're talking to." The name Dale Cooper was a ghost, a phantom from the most brutal days of the Vietnam War.